All right, brothers and sisters, welcome back to the Gospel of John, chapter 5, part 2. So, quick recap of what we've gone through so far. I'm just going to read it from the top. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. So, Jesus is in Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. The particular feast of the Jews that Jesus was attending was the Feast of Tabernacles, also known as the Feast of the Booths, which is ironic because that is the very feast that is going on right now in Israel. This is the last day of it. And this is October the 23rd right now over here in the United States. So what's even more strange about this is I don't plan my lessons. I let the Lord tell me where to go, what to do. I ask him when I wake up in the morning, what do you want from me? Where do you want me to go, Lord? What shall I do? Where should I go in your good book? And he'll give me a verse and I'll just turn to it and he'll say, speak out of here. So he told me to go to John chapter 5. The very first thing on here is Jesus is attending a feast. So I decided to look into, because I don't keep track of the feasts per se of the Jews, but Jesus, the Lord told me, look into this. And so I did, and I Googled what was the feast that Christ was attending when he healed the invalid at the pool of Bethesda. And it just so happens that it's the very feast that today is the last day of, the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths. So here the Lord tells me to go to John 5 today, and it's, some 2,000 years later, and the very feast that the lesson I'm teaching about, the very feast that's in the lesson I'm teaching about is going on today. I mean, what are the odds of that? I mean, it's a 7-day celebration that marks Israel's exodus out of Egypt and their time in the wilderness. Okay, so now, even though the Bible doesn't necessarily exactly specify what feast it is, now we even know what feast was being celebrated and why Jesus went to Jerusalem for that feast, the Feast of Tabernacles. And I find this so cool that Jesus, who is God, who was the one that parted the Red Sea for Moses and the Israelites, and led them by day by a pillar of cloud and by night by a pillar of fire through the wilderness for 40 years until they got to the River Jordan and crossed over with Joshua into the Promised Land. So what I find so cool about Jesus in all of this is that 1,400 some odd years ago was when he led Moses out of Egypt and through the wilderness, okay, and brought Joshua then across the River Jordan into the Promised Land. Now here's Jesus, like I said, 1,400 some odd years later, in the flesh, born of the Virgin Mary, attending the very feast of his people that he liberated. Now he's witnessing it as a human. I don't know, the whole thing, the way it just encompasses itself and comes full circle with Christ witnessing the very festival of the liberation of the people he liberated in the flesh as a human being. God's a time traveler. On to verse 2. Okay, now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, which means house of mercy or house of grace, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. It was believed that an angel of the Lord would come and stir the water in this pool, and that if you went in it, you could be healed. There was a lot of sick people that were around this pool at all times, hoping to be healed. And we talked about how this pool is a literal representation of Christ. Okay, Christ is the living waters. Christ is the healing balm. He is the great purifier, because we also talked about how the pool at Bethesda is a mikvah, which is it's a ancient purification pool for the Jews. Okay? And the sheep that were to be sacrificed were washed in that pool before they were taken out of the sheep gate and sacrificed. But back to the reason why I compare this pool to Jesus is because all the sick would come around this pool, and because of the faith they had, they believed that if they got in this pool, when the angels stirred the water, they could be healed. Well, all the sick would gather around Christ because they believed if they interacted with him, if he touched them, or if they just touched him, or sometimes if he just said the word like he did to the centurion, that's the kind of faith the centurion had, they would be healed. So, and Christ is the well of living water. So that's basically as far as we have gotten, and now I am going to continue with verse 3. Verse 3 says, "Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, 'Do you want to get well?' 'Sir,' the invalid replied, 'I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me.' Then Jesus said to him, 'Get up, pick up your mat, and walk.' At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked." So, what just took place here? Obviously, a miracle. Jesus has healed a man who has not been able to walk for 38 years. Jesus tells the man, "Pick up your mat and walk." And instantly the man is healed and picks up his mat and walks. Now we know that in every lesson Jesus teaches and in every miracle he performs, there are deeper lessons to be learned. The deeper teaching I'm gleaning out of this healing is that I see a prophecy within it that just isn't spoken, but is fulfilled. And what it is in Jesus telling that man to pick up his mat and walk, Jesus was painting a picture or a type and shadow of his resurrection. The mat represents the laying down of Christ's life, and the picking up of and walking with the mat represents Christ's authority to take up his life again. Well, all right, I want to keep these things around 7 minutes. So this concludes John chapter 5, verses 3 through 9, part 2. Stay tuned for part 3. Only 38 more verses to go. And I didn't plan that out either. I just stopped at verse 9, but 47 from 9 gives you 38. And we were just talking about a man who was an invalid for 38 years that Christ healed. Christ is King. So cool. It's so cool when you roll with God, just the way he just rolls everything out before you. Stay blessed, praise the Lord, and keep the faith. And I'll see you back here shortly for part 3.